The next flight you take will cruise slower than the one your grandparents boarded, not the schedule. The aircraft itself. Toronto to Tampa in the 1970s on a Boeing 727 was scheduled at 2 hours 25. The same route today on an Airbus A320 is 2 hours 45. The 727 cruised at Mach 0.84. The A320 cruises at Mach 0.78. 50 years of aerospace engineering happened in between, and the airplane came out slower. Nobody announced it. No press release, no protest, no backlash for the one change a passenger would most obviously notice. So where did 50 years of progress actually go? It went somewhere specific, and once you see where the slowdown stops looking like decline and starts looking like a receipt. First, what that number actually means, because Mach is doing something specific here. Mach is a ratio, not a speed. It's how fast you're going compared to the speed of sound in the air around you, and the speed of sound depends on temperature. At 35,000 feet in air around minus 55 degrees, the speed of sound is roughly 573 knots. So Mach 0.84 is about 480 knots. Mach 0.78 is about 455. 25 knots, give or take. Over a 2-hour flight, 10 to 15 minutes. And here's what matters about that number. It is not a technical limit. Every one of these aircraft can fly faster than it does. The 737's maximum operating speed is Mach 0.82, and it spends its life cruising at 0.78. The A320 is identical, capable of 0.82, flown at 0.78. The aircraft has more speed available every flight, and the airline declines it. That's the thing to hold on to. Cruise speed isn't a capability figure. It's a business decision, made fresh on every single flight. And there's a specific number that makes it. It's called the cost index, a setting the airline loads into the flight management computer, and it expresses exactly one thing: how much that airline values an hour of time against a kilogram of fuel. Set it low, and the aircraft flies slower to save fuel. Set it high, and it burns more to protect a connection. So the speed you fly at was chosen by an accountant, encoded as a number, and executed by a computer, usually before the crew has an opinion about it. On a day when fuel is expensive and the schedule is relaxed, that index comes down, and your aircraft flies slower than the identical aircraft that flew the identical route yesterday. So let's look at the receipts, because the comparison is sharper than most people expect. A Boeing 727 cruised at Mach 0.84 with a maximum of 0.9. That aircraft entered service in 1964. The 747 from 1969 cruised at 0.85 and could reach 0.92. Now the aircraft that replaced them on short and medium routes. The original and classic 737s cruised at Mach 0.745. The A320 cruises at 0.78. The 737 Next Generation and the MAX cruise at 0.785. So the jet that took over from the 727 flies about 7% slower, and the slowest of them, the 737 Classic, is a full 12% down on the aircraft it displaced. One detail cuts against the simple story, and you should have it. Within the 737 family, speed went back up. The Classic cruised at 0.745. The Next Generation raised it to 0.785. Airline pilots who flew both have suggested the reason was competitive. Boeing nudged its cruise number up to match the A320, which tells you what actually moves cruise speed in this industry, not passengers asking for it. Arrivals brochure. There's a physical fingerprint of this you can see from the terminal window. Look at how sharply the wing is swept back. The 727's wing was swept at 32 degrees. The A320's is swept at about 25. A more swept wing delays the drag penalty that builds as you approach the speed of sound, which is what you want if you intend to cruise fast. It's also heavier, more complex, and worse at low speed, which is what you don't want if you intend to cruise cheap. The 747, incidentally, has the sharpest sweep of any airliner, at 37.5 degrees. Those aircraft were built by people optimizing for speed. Nobody has optimized for speed since. But before this turns into a story about decline, there's a correction I have to make, and if I skip it, the pilots in the comments will make it for me. Widebodies did not slow down. The Boeing 787 cruises at Mach 0.85. The A350 cruises at 0.85. The 777 cruises at 0.84. The A380, 0.85. Those are the same numbers the 747 posted in 1969. On long haul, cruise speed has been essentially flat for over 50 years. And those modern aircraft hit it while burning a fraction of the fuel. So the honest version of this story is narrower and more interesting than the headline. Aviation didn't get slower. The narrowbody fleet got slower. And the narrowbody fleet is what almost every passenger actually flies. The A320 family and the 737 family are the two best-selling airliners in history by an enormous margin. The slowdown happened precisely where you were sitting and nowhere else. Which reframes the question completely. It's not, why did planes get slower? It's, why was it worth flying long-haul fast and not worth flying short-haul fast? The answer is in what the engineering was spent on instead. Between 1970 and 2019, according to the International Council on Clean Transportation, the fuel burn of new aircraft fell by about 41%. That's measured as block fuel intensity, the fuel needed to move a given payload a given distance. And it works out to roughly 1%, compounding every year for half a century. That is where the progress went, not into the clock, into the fuel bill. It didn't arrive evenly either. Fuel intensity improved by about 2.8% a year through the 1980s, stagnated through the 2000s, and returned to roughly 1% a year in the most recent decade. And there's a reason for that recent sluggishness, which has nothing to do with ambition. New aircraft type certifications have fallen from a peak of 6 a year in the late 1990s to fewer than 1 a year since 2020. Manufacturers largely stopped designing new aircraft and started re-engineering old ones. Here's the detail that puts all of this in perspective. The Boeing 707, which entered service in 1958, cruised faster than the narrowbody you'll fly next week. And the mechanism is worth understanding because it's the same mechanism that took the speed away. Modern engines get their efficiency from bypass ratio, a huge fan at the front pushing a large mass of air around the core relatively slowly, rather than a small amount of air very fast. It's a dramatically more efficient way to make thrust. It is also optimized for a slightly lower cruise speed. The wings followed the same logic: less sweep, higher aspect ratio, better lift to drag, worse transonic behavior. So the slowdown wasn't a decision to slow down. It's a side effect of every other decision, all of which pointed the same way. And the reason airlines accepted that side effect without a fight is arithmetic. Take 7% off a 2-hour flight and you lose about 8 minutes. Take 7% off the fuel bill and you save that on every flight, every day, for 30 years. One of those numbers is visible on a timetable. The other is the difference between a profitable route and a canceled one. The improvement is even bigger than the aircraft figures suggest, and here I want to be straight with you, because it isn't all engineering. Measured per passenger, the energy intensity of American air travel fell about 77% between 1970 and 2019. But that number includes denser seating and fuller aircraft. Some of that efficiency is the engine, some of it is the seat you're wedged into, and the fact that the middle seat next to you is now always occupied. Which raises the obvious challenge. If speed was worth having, somebody would have built for it. Somebody did. Concorde cruised at Mach 2.04 at 60,000 feet, crossing the Atlantic in about 3.5 hours. It's the control experiment for this whole argument, because it proves the engineering was never the obstacle. We could build a fast airliner in 1976, we did. Then look at what it cost. Concorde burned roughly 4 times the fuel of a 747 on a comparable Atlantic crossing, and it carried around 100 passengers against the 747's 400 plus. Put those together, and the cost per seat is not a little worse. It's catastrophically worse. In fuel per hour, Concorde consumed about 20,500 kilograms. A 787-9 burns around 5,400. And physics is unforgiving here in a way that no amount of engineering fixes. Drag rises steeply with speed, so fuel per mile scales roughly with the square of how fast you go. Doubling your speed doesn't double your fuel bill, it multiplies it. Then the sonic boom finished the argument. The United States banned overland supersonic flight in 1973, which confined Concorde to routes over water. A handful of city pairs, 20 aircraft ever built, retired in 2003. Concorde didn't fail because it was a bad aircraft. It failed because it answered a question almost nobody was willing to pay to have answered. And the market has been giving the same answer ever since. When you search a route, you sort by price, not by duration. Airlines know this with total certainty because they watch the booking data. The lowest fare wins even when it's slower, and a faster fare loses even when the difference is 20 minutes. Every airline that has ever tested speed as a selling point has learned the same lesson. Fast is a feature people admire and don't buy. Now, the number on your ticket has a second story layered on top of the first, and it's why the gap you experience is bigger than the aircraft alone can explain. The published schedule grew as well. American research covering 43 million domestic flights found published flight times rose about 8.1% between 1997 and 2017. And more than 45% of that increase came from airlines deliberately padding schedules to protect their on-time statistics. That's a separate mechanism with a separate motive, and I've made a whole video about it. But notice how the two stack. The aircraft cruises a little slower. The schedule is then written a little longer than the aircraft needs. Add congestion and taxi times, and the 2-hour 25 flight becomes 2:45 without anyone doing anything unusual. 3 different decisions, none of them coordinated, all pushing in the same direction. So can any of this be reversed? There's a serious attempt underway, and it's further along than most people realize. In June of this year, NASA's X-59 broke the sound barrier for the first time, reaching roughly Mach 1.1. It's built to spread its shock waves out so the boom arrives as a distant thump instead of a bang. Weeks later, the Federal Aviation Administration proposed repealing that 1973 overland ban and replacing the speed limit with a noise limit. Sonic boom, overpressure at the ground not exceeding 0.11 of a pound per square foot. For scale, Concorde produced roughly 2 pounds. That's a genuine change in the rules, and it removes the constraint that killed Concorde's route map. It does nothing about the other one. The fuel arithmetic that made supersonic flight ruinous in 1976 has not been repealed by anybody because it isn't a regulation. It's drag. Any supersonic airliner will burn several times the fuel per passenger of the subsonic aircraft flying alongside it, which means it can only ever sell to people who will pay several times the fare. That market exists. It's just small. And it has been small every single time anyone has measured it. Here's what I keep coming back to. Nobody in this story did anything wrong. Engineers were asked to reduce operating cost, and they delivered a 41% reduction, which is an extraordinary achievement. Airlines bought the aircraft that made routes viable. Passengers booked the cheapest fare every time, which is what told everyone upstream what to build next. The trade was speed for cost, and it worked. Flying is now something ordinary people do casually, which was not true in 1970, and that is a straightforwardly good outcome bought with those minutes. But you were never asked. There was no moment where anyone put it to passengers that the aircraft would get slower and the tickets would get cheaper. It happened one design decision at a time, across 50 years, and the only place it's visible is in a timetable nobody keeps. Your grandparents flew faster than you do. They also paid in real terms a fare most people today would find difficult to believe, which is the thing worth sitting with. That fare is the other half of this trade. And it fell much further than the speed ever did. So how far did it actually fall, and who paid for it? That's the next one.